So recently I've been playing a lot more Warzone solos, and as I was going through identifying the different tips and strategies that I use to get decent solo games, I kind of figured I'd just share them with you guys, anybody that's interested in getting better at solos or just getting better at Warzone in general. Now before we get into the actual tips themselves, they kind of fall into two different themes. One theme is consistency, the other is adaptation. And not only can you group them into different themes, but they kind of follow like a sequential process, I guess. And as you go through the game, you're going to probably go through the different tips. So tip 1 is going to be very early, as soon as you jump out of the plane. Tip 2 is going to be as soon as you land, as you're trying to set the pace for the game, all the way through until tip number 6, which usually surrounds the end game. So you can kind of think of them as tips or different steps in a mental model for how a game of Warzone solos kind of plays out. So one of the very first things that you have to identify is what is a good drop location. Now there are a couple things that make up a good drop. The first one I would always say is loot density. How quickly can you get looted up? Another factor is how central is the location. Can you consistently land at this location regardless of the flight path? If it's a yes, then it's probably a good location. If it's a no, then you're not going to be able to land there consistently, and it's probably best if you pick a different location. And last but not least, and this one kind of overrides the other two, pick a location that you actually enjoy landing at. Even if it's not very central, generally there are a bunch of different vehicles scattered all around the map. You can quickly grab one and rotate to a more central location. No, you're going to be putting yourself at a disadvantage, but if you're having fun, then it doesn't really matter so much. So once you've picked a drop, it's time to set the pace for the game. Now the pace that you're setting for a solo game kind of depends on the type of player that you are. I think solos allows for a decent amount of variety in the pace that you set. There are players who generally prefer a slower type of Warzone game, maybe 3 to 5 kills, 6, 7 max. It just allows you to explore the map, kind of set things at your own speed, limit the number of engagements, and kind of just wait it out. Enjoy the solo experience. Then I would say there's the other type of player who's kind of like the sweats, the tryhards, who's going to be trying to go for PRs, 20 kills, 30 kills. And the pace of these two games are going to be incredibly different. I'd say the ultimate thing that you want to do though, bringing it back to the theme, is to just be consistent. If you know you're going for a 30 kill game, chances are you don't want to land at Summit because you don't want to set that slow of a pace for the entire game. And the same thing applies in the reverse. Why land Superstore if you know that you're going to have to slow down the game in order to feel the pace that matches you best? It doesn't really make sense. Now at this part of the game, you should have a decent amount of loot. You should have maybe a few kills. It's time to think about loadout. Now this one is a lot less flexible than some of the others. There are certain characteristics that make picking a loadout for solos significantly more restrictive than picking a loadout for, say, quads, because you don't really have, you don't have anyone to depend on if your loadout doesn't work out. But there are factors to consider that are going to give you the best balance between picking something that you enjoy and picking something that is actually reasonably viable for solos. Generally, I'd say the biggest factor is picking something that is versatile. And as soon as we bring the conversation of versatility into it, then you're going to end up with an assault rifle. Now, there are a couple different choices for a good assault rifle. Let's get the obvious one out of the way, the CR56 AMAX. Probably the most versatile gun in this game. Deadly at close range, deadly at medium range, deadly at long range if you can actually hit the shots. Just deadly in general. Now you can kind of tweak it to find the loadout that you prefer. Generally I will run a monolithic suppressor, the XRK Zodiac, Merc 4 grip, 45 round mags, and for the optic I don't use the VLK 3 times. Because like I said, this is versatility. If I'm going ghost, then I need something that can perform in super close range and medium to long range. And the VLK definitely does not lend itself to being good in super close range. So I will generally use the GI Mini Reflex with the blue dot. And I think this is actually a pretty solid setup. But it's not the only viable option. We have stuff like the FFAR, which is still good despite the nerfs. And we have the slightly less popular but just as deadly AS Val. And given the current patch that we're on, which is kind of like the mid-season 3 update, A lot of the weapons are incredibly balanced, so if you don't pick those 3 that I just mentioned, you can probably pick up a Ram 7. The Graw is another fantastic option. The idea here is that you actually have choice, but your choices are kind of limited to assault rifles because they're going to give you the most flexibility. Oh, and honorable mentions, the LC-10. It actually has very little recoil and is pretty strong, so you can kind of use it as like a closer range assault rifle. It's actually pretty good. And if you can control the recoil, then probably something like an MP5. Although I will tend to stay away from this as a single loadout gun. Now, like I mentioned before, the 3 tips that we just covered speak to consistency. Once you decide the location that you want to drop, the pace that you want to have, and the loadout that you want to use, stick to it. One of the biggest killers for improvement in any aspect of life is when you have too many variables moving at the same time. If every solo game that you play, you change your drop location, you wildly alter the pace at which you play those games, and you change your loadout frequently, you're going to limit the pace at which you can actually improve at the game, because there's simply too many different factors, too many different things changing at any given time. If you limit your drops, you establish good rotation routes. If you limit your class setup, then you kind of have to learn how to handle the recoil of the weapon that you're using, and you're going to have to learn good gun skill. And forcing yourself to stick to essentially a routine, a game plan, is actually going to free up mental resources for the next 3 steps. Now, these fall under the topic of adaptation. By this point in the game, you should be around the 3rd or 4th circle, essentially mid-game. So, tip number 4, establish a good mental model for deciding on rotation routes. Now, that is a mouthful, but simply said, the idea is to just develop good decision making when it comes to rotations. For this one, you kind of have to think a few steps ahead. So you have to see the circle that you're currently in, the next possible rotation, and the next possible rotation after that. When the last circle comes, you generally don't want to be the one that has to push out into the open, across the open field, just to get into cover when you could have saved yourself by rotating early. And this one, unfortunately, is just going to come with practice. It's something that I'm trying to learn myself, and there are a lot of things that can kind of like set you out of a good rotation, depending on different fights that you get in, or maybe somebody is trying to hold you, or maybe there's just some random person camping in a building and you don't want to have to go through that building. There are a lot of things that can set off a good rotation, but the better you get at the game, the better you will get at accounting for the different variances and still establishing a good rotation regardless of what happens. And like I said, I am right here with y'all trying to figure it out myself. Tip number 5, we're picking up the pace. Picking a good secondary loadout. About this point in the game, it should be around the 5th circle, and it's time for the second loadout to come. Now, if you follow tip number 3 and you actually picked a good versatile weapon, then chances are when this second loadout comes, you're probably going to feel fairly confident with the stuff that you already have, and you're probably not going to need it. But depending on the last circle, the last rotation, how the current area of the map is set up, you may want to grab something to actually help you out depending on the engagement that you're going to have to take. If it's looking like a downtown circle, then chances are you're going to probably want to get an SMG. If it's looking like an open field circle, like out in the area by airport, then you're going to want to have a sniper rifle or a kind of long distance rifle like a Graw with a 3x scope. And again, this one is going to come with just building up good decision making. Analyze the situation that you're in, pick a loadout that's going to help you in the final circle. And last but not least, if you've made it to this point, then it's probably the last circle. And literally the only tip I could give you at this point, I mean, other than just being a cheese and buying a precision airstrike, well, it's not being a cheese, it's actually a good decision, but other than that stuff, one of the biggest things is just to remain calm. Everyone gets nervous in the last circle. It's a very tense situation. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of unknowns, especially if a lot of fights are not happening around you. You kind of have to be rotating. It's generally going to be a dangerous rotate, and you have to consider where people might be, how you're going to start a gunfight, and you're just going to get nervous. Slow it down. Take some deep breaths, one step at a time. Focus on the next move that you have to make. Don't try to overthink the entire situation. Just focus on making your next move a good move. For me personally, I will generally take some deep breaths, consider the rotations that I have to make, consider the safest route to rotate, and kind of think, okay, while I'm rotating, where could I get shot from? And what is the potential of someone being in the location that I'm rotating to? And by default, I always assume that wherever I'm going, there's already someone there. And I think just limiting my decision making to those 3-4 points actually makes it a lot easier for me to remain calm, especially while I'm taking deep breaths. It actually allows for me to be pretty calm and to focus on the specific situation that I'm in and that I'm getting in. Chances are you're gonna lose, it's fine. But if you consistently make better decisions, then over time you're gonna lose less. And if you do still lose, then it's gonna be a lot closer than it would have been a month, 2 months ago. And hopefully if you followed all of these steps, then you have secured a win. Congratulations, because 90% of the time I do not. Like I said, these tips are things that I have been developing for myself because I kind of wanted to improve my game, and I needed some way to formalize my thought process to kind of just get it down. Well, I was gonna say get it down on paper, but you know what I mean. But hopefully they could be useful to you guys. I hope that they were. That's pretty much it. If you guys enjoyed the video, as usual, leave a like, and I will see you in the next one. Later.